Why, hello there. Welcome to U.S. history class. From my living room. No, it's not my living room, it's my dining room. Got my cold coffee. Hold on a second. Much better. Tomorrow, Friday, I'm going to send you guys a test. It won't be due until Monday. That's weird. You get the weekend to do it. But obviously it's an open book test. Obviously it's an open internet test. Obviously, it's an Ask Your Younger Sister test. And the test is going to be about this chapter, World War I Begins. For those of you who don't have a book, I sent photos of all the pages you had to read. The test will be about that, but it's also going to be about other things as well. I sent you guys a link to look at propaganda posters from World War I. We had talked a little bit about propaganda when in the Spanish-American War. Remember those pictures of like the really brutish Spaniard guerrilla killing the people of Cuba? Remember the Maine. World War I, boof! Propaganda goes through the roof. Everyone is getting into it because they can, because the technology has changed. They can print out all this more stuff. There's newspapers are a regular thing. Film becomes a regular thing. I also sent you that video to watch about film and about how that affected. It's the first war that's filmed. It's the first war that's seen by people around the world. Only within a few days, well, longer than that, but fairly close to when it's actually happening. The first war that will show up on TV. Anyone know that one? Anyone? Vietnam. Vietnam is the war that was the first televised war, and actually there was cameras there, so you could watch it practically live. But World War I you saw in the movie theaters. You go to the movie theaters and see it, and of course, as you saw, what audiences saw was not news, but propaganda. A lot of it was staged. They would make their own versions of the war to show to the folks at home. And why would they show it to the folks at home? For the folks at home to support the war, for everyone to get involved. World War I is really whenever you have a war, your country wants to get everyone involved. Remember the Maine. Like, we're all in this together. Spanish-American War. We have to go off and get our empire started. World War I, there's now movies. Newspapers are much more distributed much more widely. There's much more of a mass media, and the whole country can get involved, and the whole world can get involved. And that's one of the things that really changes with World War I. All right, your first page on here, you had the story of Jeannette Rankin, first woman in Congress, only woman in Congress, who voted against World War I. Good for her. We'd only listened to her. Obviously, more women in Congress. Page 655. Causes of World War I. They list nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and the alliance system as the causes of World War I. Nationalism, my country's better than your country. Make America great again. That nationalism really kicks in the 1800s. In the 1800s, Europe, Germany becomes Germany, Italy becomes Italy. Before that, there were all these little tiny kingdoms and fiefdoms and this and that. And there was just a bunch of mess of different stuff. And the idea that, no, we should be a nation, we should be one people, that really starts to happen in the 1800s. And so, in a way, World War I is the first time where all these new nations bump into each other and don't know how to stand back. Number 2, the second section, imperialism. Let's read this for a quick second. For many centuries, European nations have been building empires. These nations had slowly extended their economic and political control over various peoples of the world. Colonies supplied the European imperial powers, blah, 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 blah. 2 things. 1, it's not just European imperial powers, European nations, European imperial powers. There were other empires in the world, empires involved in this very war. The Japanese had an empire. The Ottomans had an empire. The Ottoman Empire was based in what is now Turkey and spread through much of the Middle East and also into the southern section of Europe, and had been for hundreds and hundreds of years. It goes way back to the fall of the Roman Empire. Not the Ottoman Empire, but that Asian empire down there. Things change. And also, what other empire? What empire did we study just last week? The New American Empire, just in 1898. The United States goes off and takes the Philippines, takes Puerto Rico, Cuba, Guam, Hawaii. It becomes a global empire as well. And I hope you'll listen to that radio show that was about how the United States changed its name and why it had to change its name. Listen to that. It's pretty interesting about how up until 1898, everyone talked about the United States. And then afterwards, it's like, but we're not really the United States. We're this empire. We're this bigger thing. We have stuff all over the world. And for the name they took was America. The alliance system, all this is, the important thing in here that I think you should remember in this part is balance of power. Balance of power. I've got a bunch of guns. They've got a bunch of guns. Therefore, nothing will happen. We'll have peace if we can each have the same amount of guns. This gets played out throughout the 20th century, throughout the 1900s, till today as well. And it gets a little, the arms races, which comes up later bit in this chapter. We're going to come back to that. But balance of power is, you've got enough guns, I've got enough guns, we won't kill each other. Later, when people develop nuclear weapons, it's that balance of power, they changed the name to mutually assured destruction. As in, I've got so many nuclear weapons, I can kill your country 10 times over, and you've got so many countries, you can kill my country 10 times over, so let's not go to war. Hope that works out well. All right, war breaks out. An assassination leads to the war. Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Do you need to know his name? Not really. It's a pretty great name. There's some band that's called Franz Ferdinand. I remember that from like the 90s or something like that. A Serbian nationalist, a person who believed that Serbia should be its own country, assassinated the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne in order to get independence. Similar, I would say, I don't know, is this true? Is where the Serbians, like George Washington in the 13 colonies, like we're going to start our own revolutionary war and we're going to get our independence. In the book, they don't call them a revolutionary army. They call them what? They say Princip was a member of the Black Hand, an organization promoting Serbian nationalism. When we studied the U.S. Colonies, they never really said an organization promoting U.S. nationalism. When we talk, let's leave it. Let's move on. Enough of that. Okay, so war breaks out. Here's the amazing thing to me. It all breaks out in one chapter. Read that, one paragraph. Not even one chapter, one paragraph on page 657. The alliance system pulled one nation after another into the conflict. On August 1st, Germany, obligated by treaty to support Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. 2 days later, Germany declares war on Russia's ally France. After Germany invades Belgium, Britain declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary, and they all just get to it. It was supposed to be this little tiny war. One guy gets assassinated. And so then the Austro-Hungarian Empire says, all right, we're going to go have this little tiny war in Serbia and put an end to this. Everyone else says, oh no, we'll stand side by side with you. And so the Germans declare war on Russia, and then on France, and everyone gets involved over this minor thing. and they're just like, let's start a war. Because wars were happening a lot in Europe at this time. The French and the Germans, they weren't the Germans yet, they were the Prussians. The Franco-Prussian War happened just 40 years early in the 1870s. Huge embarrassment for France. For a long time, Germany was just rolling over France every 20 years. And here it was again. And then the war starts. And it becomes the next section of the fighting starts. The trenches. There's a little drawing there of the trenches. I'm going to send you guys, if I haven't already, I'm going to send you a video about the trenches. Because it's pretty... World War One. I said, what else are we going to say? Okay, I'm going to come right off the trenches. Now let's stay in the trenches for a second. One side's here, one side here. They literally would battle over an inch. They'd move like this, they'd move like that, they'd move like this. For years, soldiers just were dug holes and shot each other. Because the Kaiser of Germany and the King of England and the Prime Minister of France and the Tsar of Russia couldn't just say, you know what, let's not have a war. And at the time, a lot of people were saying, you know what, we shouldn't have a war. This is dumb. But they went into it anyway. And it turned into one of the most brutal war that the world had seen. There were wars earlier that more people had died. There was another war in China in the 1800s in which 30 million people died in that war. In World War I, 17 million people died. And the way that they died was horrific. War is always horrific. But one thing that had changed was that it became a total war. In the book, they talk about Germany invading Belgium and killing civilians. Later, the British put a blockade on Germany and don't allow any food in, and hundreds of thousands of people starved to death. And also technologically, the Industrial Revolution. We're getting better now. We can build cars. We have phones. We know how to use technology to improve our capabilities. A sewing machine, you can sew faster. But with a machine gun, you can kill faster. With an airplane, you can drop bombs. With a U-boat, what's a U-boat? Submarine. It's a German name for submarine. That one you're going to have to learn, U-boat, because that comes back in World War II. U-boat. The world's kind of shocked. All of a sudden, ships are being sunk invisibly because there's a submarine. There hadn't been submarines before. There actually was one in the Civil War, but it's this weird like wooden boat. It's an anecdote. It's an asterisk of history. But all of a sudden now in World War One, the ability to kill a lot of people quickly is in everyone's hands. The United States enters the war. Why did the United States enter the war? I think that's a question for your test. I think you're going to have to answer that. I've got my opinions. I'm sure you'll have yours. If you read this section, it talks about why we got in the war. That's on your test. Why did the U.S. go to the war? At the very end of the war, why did it start? Okay, and then quickly jump over to 664. A revolution in Russia. Meanwhile, I love it how it says that. A revolution in Russia. Meanwhile, events in Russia also troubled the United States. Boy, that's an understatement. In 1917, the Tsar, who is the king of the emperor of the Russian Empire, Tsar, related to the word Caesar, the Tsar gets overthrown. Just like the French Revolution overthrew the French king. Just like all those throughout Latin America, all the countries become independent, throw off the Spanish Empire. It finally gets to Russia. They they overthrow the king, overthrow the czar, and they establish a whole new thing that the world has not seen, which is the Soviet Republic of Russia, a socialist or communist, depending on communist more than socialist. That changes the world. Not just Russia, it changes the world. In World War I, what happens is that the new revolutionary government takes its armies out of the war. It's like, we're not going to fight this war anymore. Which is a good thing. But because they're in the middle of this revolution. We're going to talk more about that later, because it has effects that really change the rest of the 20th century. Balance of power, this side versus that side. In World War I, it's like you got your Germans, the Ottomans, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. On the other side, you've got Russia, France, United States, Britain, etc. After World War I, after World War II, we still have World War II to go through as well. But the Russians and the revolution, that changes a lot. We're talking about more of that later. Anyways, I'm going to test you on what is in this chapter. I'm going to ask you what your opinion is. Why did the United States enter World War I? I sent you a link to look at propaganda posters. Part of the test is you're going to have to look at propaganda posters and tell me where they're from. So that means you're going to have to be able to recognize the language that they're in. I'm not asking you to learn Russian. But if you want to, got some spare time, learn some Russian. What the heck? But to recognize it, it's a different alphabet. I'm going to ask you. You're going to need to know what French looks like. Again, you don't have to learn French, but you need to be able to say it like, "Oh, that's French. Oh, that's German." That will help you. So you're going to have to look at the propaganda posters. So look at the ones that I sent you the link to. What else is on the test? Mostly on the test is what's in the book. I'm going to ask you to define imperialism again. I'm going to ask you to give me examples of imperialism. I'm going to ask you to, we're going to talk about nationalism a little bit as well. I'm going to find you another thing to read about nationalism to add to this. That's about it. Anyways, I'll send out the test tomorrow. Next week, we're going to start post-World War I, in which the world goes crazy. It's the Roaring Twenties. It's like the war is over. Let's all have a party. It's kind of crazy. And then it all goes to hell again in the end of the 1920s. It's a rough stretch we're entering right now in U.S. history and world history. World War I is kind of the beginning, the first sign of that. All right. Sounds good. Talk to you later.